For the past 30 years, we've been going completely in the wrong direction. We've been caught up in silly rules and rubrics and pulling things out of centuries past that don't speak to the church in the modern world. This new translation of the Mass, for example, is incredibly awkward. And parenthetically, the German bishops voted this past Friday unanimously to throw it out and go back to the old translation. The next thing that was on the agenda was communion in the hand. They were going to say to us, you cannot receive communion in the hand, only on the tongue. All we would have had was chaos, because you're not going to go back to that, and we priests aren't going to go back to it. And then the final thing on the agenda was the restoration of the Latin Mass. And talk about chaos, 35% of American Catholics now call themselves former Catholics. Did they abandon the church, or did the church abandon them? We were so caught up in telling them rules and laws and regulations, we never talked to them about the mercy of Jesus Christ. And now suddenly we have a new voice who's calling us to do that. Pope Francis met this past week with a group of 8 cardinals whom he has called together to help reform the church. And in his opening statement to them, he said, it is 50 years since Vatican II. 50 years ago, the Council Fathers tried to bring the church into the modern world, and nothing has happened since then. And he said, starting today, you and I are going to begin to implement Vatican II. He told those cardinals, I want you to go back to your regions of the world and talk to the bishops about this question I've raised about divorce and remarriage. Do we have the whole thing wrong? Are we punishing people who made a mistake rather than forgiving them? He said, we only punish people who commit a crime. And so we have a whole new voice talking suddenly about the mercy and the healing of Jesus Christ.
Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt for the Remnant Forum. There's a lot of buzz these days about the upcoming Synod on the Family that will happen in Rome coming October. A lot of excitement, a lot of apprehension about what exactly this is going to mean. Personally, I'm a little confused by how we can expect anything great to come from this Synod. How it appears to me, and I'm just a layman, but as I look across the Tiber and sort of check out what's going on and evaluate all of this, it seems to me that what we have is the Church of Vatican II, operating under the spirit of Vatican II, has created a monumental, worldwide, universal mess in which we have mass apostasy from the faith, in which doctrine and dogma have been set aside in the name of toleration and peace and harmony and happy thoughts and so forth. And now the Vatican is going to, already has actually polled the people, taken a poll of all the folks who basically have moved away from the faith to varying degrees, asked them what they like and don't like about the way the church is being run today, or the way they're trying to practice their faith or not practice their faith. They're collecting all this data, and they're now going to have a synod in which they are going to resolve the problems that, as far as I can see, were created by the spirit of the Second Vatican Council, created by the new orientation of the Catholic Church. In the first place, this is like something out of a Laurel and Hardy skit, not looking at or reevaluating what's gone wrong over the past 50 years, as Pope Benedict made an attempt to do toward the end of his pontificate, but rather just giving us more of the same and finding a way to pastorally tolerate or embrace folks who've basically just abandoned the faith altogether. So we're trying to get to the bottom of this, trying to find out what can be expected, and hoping and praying for the best, of course, in October, but not seeing a whole lot of reason to expect good things. Chris Ferrara, we now have this Instrumentum Laboris for the upcoming General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops in Rome. The working document is a summary of the results of the consultation with the faithful and clergy on the pastoral challenges facing the family in the context of evangelization. It's a 44-page document. What do you think? Do you expect great things?
Certainly not. When you hear the phrase pastoral challenges, that's modernist speak for how do we get around doctrine. And what this document does thematically is basically, without saying so, admit that the past 50 years have represented a total failure of the Catholic hierarchy to instruct the faithful on the most basic principles of the faith, especially in the area of marriage and procreation. Now, by way of a general comment, the whole methodology is suspect. Oh, let us take a survey. We'll go all over the world and we'll seek the input from the bishops and the line clergy, and this strange entity known as the people of God. Yes, we must consult the people of God, the same people of God that has turned its back on the most fundamental teachings of the church. And so the methodology here is to determine that, gee, the people of God just aren't following God's teaching anymore. How can we accommodate the people of God? And thematically, the idea is, well, some people say we should do this, and some people say we should do that, according to our survey data. Well, we have to find a balanced approach. It's another modernist giveaway. We're looking for a balanced approach between the right way and the wrong way. So, for example, when they talk about homosexual unions, they mention that we need to find an approach between the excessive rigorism on the one hand and excessive compromise on the other hand. We mustn't be too uncompromising, and we mustn't be too compromising. What does that mean? It means we must compromise. So there must be a way to approach these people in these illicit unions in a non-judgmental way, says the document. What does that mean? How do you approach people who are obviously engaged in a sodomitical relationship in a non-judgmental way? I mean, they're engaged in public acts which are contrary to the most fundamental teaching of the church. Their whole relationship is based upon what the church used to say was an act that cries out to heaven for divine retribution because it's so contrary to nature. And now we're told that we have to take an opinion survey to see how we can accommodate these people in a non-judgmental way. And who would be against accommodating these people in a non-judgmental way? You see what this document is doing.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, who actually, in these various groups that have departed from the church's moral teaching, do we really hear this hue and cry for toleration and acceptance from the Catholic Church? I mean, yes, okay, we do hear for blanket acceptance of the sin, but we don't really hear anything other than we need the church to change her rules. In other words, the church is not being intolerant. The church has always had rules governing the moral life. And what we're hearing from these groups is we want the church to change those rules. Well, those rules simply cannot be changed without violating natural law, the church's teaching, and God's law. So what's the point of the poll, Chris? I don't quite understand what the point is, polling people who have no regard whatsoever for the church's moral teaching.
Well, precisely, but the results of the poll are interesting. And the theme of the poll basically admits to the catastrophic failure on the part of the hierarchy when it says again and again in various contexts, people don't understand this church teaching any longer. People don't follow that church teaching any longer. People don't even understand the natural law any longer. And we need to revitalize the church's language, says this document. Yeah. We need to represent the natural law in new, revitalized language. Hello, wasn't that supposed to have been done?
Yeah, I thought that
50 years ago?
I thought Vatican II succeeded in doing that. What was the new spirit that came into the world and brought the beautiful teaching of the church to such a more friendly way to the people? I thought they already declared victory on that front 50 years ago.
This is the neo-Catholic narrative. We desperately needed the Second Vatican Council because those stale old theology manuals just weren't cutting it any longer. And as people like Janet Smith and others have said, well, with the council, we abandoned the formulaic past of the church and we found new and more inspiring ways of presenting the church's teaching. And now we have this document in which the hierarchy is admitting nobody's following church teaching any longer and people don't even understand the natural law. And in fact, the document ludicrously suggests that maybe we should present the natural law in the form of, get this, symbols, like those used in the liturgy.
Pictures, you mean?
So we're going to wave signal flags to tell people what the natural law is. I mean, it would be comical if it weren't an implicit admission from beginning to end that this church, the Church of Vatican II, no longer commands the respect of the faithful outside of the traditionalist communities and the more conservative neo-Catholics.
Yeah. But I mean, are they basically admitting at least a tacit admission of the failure of Vatican II? If they need to come along here because they've lost millions of adherents, folks who have just hemorrhaged out of the church and gone elsewhere seeking the truth, Where is the admission that something went wrong at Vatican II? There doesn't seem to be one. They're just going to give us more of the same spirit of Vatican II on steroids, apparently, and that's on some level supposed to fix it. Now, doesn't that fit in with the old definition of insanity, repeating the same thing and hoping for better results or hoping for different results?
Well, I mean, their reply would be, wow, we really haven't implemented the council yet.
Yes.
After all, only half a century has gone by. Why, let's get to work implementing the real council. But they never tell us what the real council is. In fact, this call for revitalized language to express the moral teaching of the church doesn't give you any idea of what this revitalized language would be. How about thou shalt not commit adultery? That's pretty clear.
Pretty antiquated.
I think the average person would understand what adultery is and that he should not commit adultery.
Right.
What are we going to have some sort of interesting new symbol now, something representing adultery with a perpendicular line through it? Is that what we're going to have? No adultery symbols?
Well, they're talking about these divorced and remarried Catholics that now want to receive the sacraments as though these people sort of stumbled into a situation that was just unavoidable. They made a mistake as youngsters, and we need to have compassion for them. But, Chris, the reality is that statistically speaking, Catholics, the majority of Catholics have been cohabitating, have been engaging in all sorts of, using contraception and so forth. We know the numbers are staggering and startling, and it's been going on for a couple of generations. So the idea that the divorce issue needs to be addressed, it's almost like, well, what about everything else that went first in terms of departing from the Church's moral teaching on the part of the vast majority of the faithful Catholics?
Well, this is a new stage in the post-conciliar crisis. We've been besieged by one novelty after another for the past 50 years. They wrecked the liturgy. They emptied the seminaries and convents. Churches are closing. Schools are closing. The traditionalist religious orders are the only ones that are exhibiting any robust growth. And the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate, because of their attachment to tradition, represent the only religious order today that's under any kind of Vatican scrutiny and is being disciplined. So having wrecked everything in their path in terms of doctrine and liturgy, now they're coming for morality. Now people who are living in a state of public adultery, who, as John Paul II insisted only 30 years ago, cannot approach the Blessed Sacrament unless they agree to remain continent in their second relationships. Now even that teaching is going to be thrown overboard. Listen to what the secretary of the Pontifical Council, or rather the president of the Pontifical Council for the Families, said, Archbishop Vincenzio Paglia, regarding the upcoming synod. The goal of the synod of bishops on the family is not just to repeat doctrines, but to find solutions for remarried divorcees and for everyone. Are they out of their minds? There is no solution. The remarried divorcee has a problem. He's living in a state of public adultery. The church has insisted for 2,000 years, right up to and including the teaching of John Paul II, that people in these adulterous relationships, according to the doctrine of the church, cannot receive the Blessed Sacrament. It's impossible. What is this solution they're looking for?
No, that's exactly it. They've already made a mess of things with the easy annulment factory that they've set up, but apparently that's not enough. And again, they keep talking about this in terms of what's charitable and the pastoral approach, rather than just equipping people with the rule book, telling them this is what the Catholic Church teaches, which is the most charitable thing you can do. I think they're preparing to bend the rules now. They're preparing to stab in the back, by the way, some of the courageous bishops, such as now Cardinal Burke and others who refused communion for those who had deviated from the Church's moral teaching. Now, even those men are going to have the Vatican not backing them up anymore, perhaps changing the rule, but probably leaving it up to the bishops to use their pastoral discretion in matters such as these. And we all know where that leads.
Well, what did we read but the recent revelation that for the upcoming synod, they've somehow managed to arrange the limited participation of Cardinal Mueller, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. They're going to limit his participation in the synod. Why? Because he's gone on record in one of the best documents that have come out of the Vatican in 50 years as saying that this teaching regarding the inability of those in adulterous second unions to approach the Blessed Sacrament reflects divine revelation itself and cannot be abandoned. They're going to keep him out of the synod in some way.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's as if, because this Pope seems to have his own thing going on. that thing doesn't really involve affirming doctrine and confirming the brethren in their faith, then everyone is running amok while he does whatever it is he wants to do, like planting olive trees in the Vatican garden.
Yeah, yeah.
Following which, we have the worst violence in the Mideast, by the way, since the 1967 Arab-Israeli conflict.
The FAA just closed down any more flights to Tel Aviv. I mean, yeah, things are getting worse and worse. That's the thing that makes you so upset about all this, is that if they had a workable model, Chris, if they could point to something that was working, maybe we'd go along with this. But everything they do just causes more trouble, more strife in the world and in the church and in the faithful. And yet there's a stubborn, and I'm sorry, arrogant refusal on their part to admit the obvious. Their policies are disastrous and have been for a half century.
What they're basically saying is, well, we broke it, but let us fix it. I'm sorry, but I don't think they've earned the right to propose solutions, which clearly would involve undermining the very teaching they have failed to affirm for half a century. And think of the implications of this. If they were to find a solution for the divorced and remarried, and the only thing they can possibly mean by that is some way for public adulterers to receive Holy Communion, if they're really, really sorry about having become public adulterers, if they approve that, who isn't entitled to receive communion who's in a state of mortal sin?
That's it.
What about couples who cohabit?
Yeah.
For that matter, what about the people involved in these sodomitical so-called same-sex marriages? Why wouldn't they be entitled to approach the Blessed Sacrament? What happens, in fact, to the idea in general that someone who's in a state of mortal sin cannot receive Holy Communion? Who are we to judge?
Yeah, no.
That's going to be mantra.
No, that's exactly it, Chris. And I think it's important to drive home the obvious. It's not the folks who are living in these divorced and remarried situations who are to blame. I mean, these people, the vast majority of them, are simply victims of Vatican II as well. They haven't been catechized. They weren't taught how to say the rosary. They have no idea what the Mass is about if they came out of Catholic schools. It's been a shipwreck all along. So, really, you lay the blame at the feet of those responsible, starting from the Vatican and moving all the way down to the priests who, for the past 40, 50 years, have refused to say anything about humanae vitae or contraception or abortion or homosexuality. They're not talking about these issues. So, of course, you've got mass confusion on the part of the faithful. And that's where the blame really needs to be. And I'm sorry, but given the scandal that the Vatican for the past 50 years has overseen with respect to the clergy and the clerical sex scandal, the homosexualization of the priesthood, I no longer look to the priesthood and to the bishops and even to the Pope for moral backing on things like this when it comes to raising my own children. They have lost their moral credibility.
Well, what we're seeing now is another unprecedented development. We have some of the more sensible cardinals who are waking up to the gravity of the situation, standing up and saying that Cardinal Casper is proposing nothing less than the demolition of the church's moral edifice here. And they're also saying that his scholarship on the Council of Nicaea regarding divorced and remarried people is utterly fraudulent. The church has never approved the communion for the divorced and remarried. Nicaea addressed the situation of certain rigorists who said that one ought not to remarry even after one's wife has died. That was the so-called second marriage that the Council of Nicaea was confronting, and the Council of Nicaea said, of course, one can receive Holy Communion if one's wife or husband has passed away, and then there's a second marriage. To hold otherwise is rigorism of the worst sort. That's what Nicaea was talking about. This fraud of a cardinal, this ecclesiastical termite, has somehow become, and this is what the media are calling him, the Pope's theologian.
And
what are we to do?
Meanwhile, Pope Francis comes out and says to Scalfari that celibacy was established in the 10th century, 900 years after our Lord. And Cardinal Brandmuller has to come out and correct that. I mean, who is running this show?
Yeah, Cardinal Brandmuller came out with an excellent essay on the subject, showing that clerical celibacy was not some law invented in the 10th century, but rather that the discipline of clerical celibacy became formalized around an existing practice that goes back to apostolic times.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly the first disciples had wives, but as time passed, the idea that a clergyman would engage in sexual relations with a wife was considered unthinkable.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that was the traditional discipline of the church. Yeah, the priesthood is dedicated to God, and man should not have to be solicitous of a wife if he's configured to Christ in the sacred priesthood. That's as old as the church itself. And here we have a cardinal, and what he's really doing is, let's face it, publicly correcting the Pope,
Right.
who made another one of his offhand remarks. And by the way, the Vatican hasn't really denied it. They've said that the interview that Scalfari came out with, the third that this Pope has granted to this militant atheist, is faithful to the spirit of the conversation, but that the words in quotes cannot confidently be attributed to the Pope. What does that mean? Did the Pope say it or not?
Well, that's just it. Poor Father Lombardi said something like, I will find the solutions to this. He's trying to figure out what happened. But Chris, why does the Pope keep going back to this atheist fellow who apparently cannot be counted on to do anything more than consult his memory about how the interview went, jot a few notes? This isn't Scalfari's fault. I'm sorry. Why is Francis doing this if it leads to such scandal that even Father Lombardi is scratching his head trying to make ends meet out of it?
So looking back on the first year and a half of this pontificate, in the context of this upcoming synod, one of Francis's high watermarks during the first 18 months of his pontificate, his choice of shoes, the place where he lives, the cheap car, various publicity stunts, including the planting of the olive tree, followed by an eruption of violence in the Mideast like we haven't seen in decades. This synod, which is now openly threatening to overturn Catholic practice, his various statements about how he doesn't want to convert atheists or evangelicals. What has he accomplished for the good of the church in these 18 months? I see nothing but a headline-grabbing papacy, to quote the BBC, I think it was.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it, Chris. And I think we're even seeing that with some of our neo-Catholic brothers, where there's sort of the beginning of something of a deafening silence from some of the neo-Catholic, elements of the blogosphere. And I don't blame them. I mean, this is getting really, really tricky now. And I think a lot of people are holding their breath, trying to find out, waiting to see what happens in October, because I don't know. Like we said before, we sure hope for a Humane Vitae 11th hour, change of heart or a surprise. But there's really no reason to believe that no matter what happens in October at this synod, that it's going to go good. I mean, good for the church or for souls. At best, I think we're going to see them say, no, the church's teaching has not changed, but we're going to leave it up to the bishops to take a pastoral approach to people who are in this situation. And as I said before, it's all over when they do that. So I don't see this coming out in any sense in a good way for the church.
Well, you make a good point about the relative silence in the neo-Catholic blogosphere. In the Catholic Herald, William Odie, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, Oddie, basically sounded a theme along those lines when he said, look, at this point, loyalty to the papacy for the sake of church unity might require silence.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's come to that for these people. They feel that this Pope has said too many things for them to explain away. So the best approach, according to them, is to say nothing.
Right.
Meanwhile, the rest of us are left to address the issues that the Pope is raising and to try to do something about the scandal that has been caused by these repeated interviews with one bombshell after another, and now this upcoming synod. And regarding the synod, I think you're right. There's just no way the outcome of this can be net positive for the church. Mm-hmm. The leading participants in it are already vowing that they're going to find a solution to the problem. What problem? Of divorced and remarried Catholics. The problem with divorced and remarried Catholics is that they're divorced and remarried.
It's a little hard to fix it now.
There is no solution to the problem other than to remedy their own situation in keeping with, I have to repeat this, the teaching of John Paul II only 30 years ago in Familiaris Consortio, that people in these objectively adulterous relationships have to vow that they will live as brother and sister. This is what the church has always said. There is no other solution. So if they're meeting with the avowed purpose of finding a solution, which the church has proposed already for 2,000 years, then clearly they're up to finding a different solution.
Yeah.
And that can't be good. It just can't be good for the church.
No, it can't. And I think you see, if you read between, not too far between the lines of what Cardinal Burke has been saying and others in Rome, I think we're heading for we're heading for a tilt, for a real fight here. But as we saw at the conclave and right afterwards, when one of the first things that Pope Francis did from the balcony was quote his dear friend Cardinal Casper, quote from his latest book. That was a sign, I think, right away that we're all in for it. And I think even though you do have the Cardinal Burkes, thank God, who are beginning to show signs of raising some resistance, I think we know where this is going. Casper has the Pope in his corner, or the Pope has Casper in his corner, however you want to look at it. They're trying to push these more conservative Germans like Mueller out of it. It's not looking good. It's just really not looking good.
We're in a situation where the laity have to stand up for the truth and they have to speak out publicly against what's happening. As I said earlier in this episode, you can see the stages through which the post-conciliar crisis has progressed. They wrecked the liturgy. Then they started tampering with evangelization in favor of ecumenism. Then came interreligious dialogue. Then the seminaries emptied, the convents emptied, the pews emptied, the schools began to close. What's left? Basic moral teachings. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Sodomy is a sin that cries out to heaven for retribution. Now they want to come and alter the teaching on those fundamentals of the natural law. That's the last vestige of traditional Catholicism left, and the people participating in this synod are vowing to find a solution, as if there were one, to a predicament that people have placed themselves into because they violate the divine and natural law.
No, that's
the final stage, the attack on morality itself.
Listen, Chris, I want to...
In the name of the people of God, by the way.
Yeah, and compassion, of course, pastoral compassion. I want to have you come back next week, and maybe what we should do is go into this, the document. As I said, it's a 44-page document. There's a lot to it, and I'd challenge you to find some things that are good in the document too. I know there are, but I'd like to highlight some of those so it doesn't sound like we're just all one-sided. And the reason for this is because this document, which is sort of the working document for the Synod itself, I think if we kind of break it down for people so they understand what we're facing come October, we may have a better chance of waking the sleeping masses to the fact that we need to stand up and speak out against this thing now. It could be changed. Everyone knows Pope Francis and his team are very susceptible. They're highly susceptible to public opinion. So if we get our friends in the neo-Catholic world to recognize how, and I think they are, and their silence that we spoke about earlier indicates that, to recognize where we are and how important it is for us to stand up loyally and protest what's going to happen, Chris, maybe things can change.
This is no time for misguided loyalty to the Pope. People in the blogosphere, in the constituency that is rightly enough called neo-Catholic, because it's all about this new church, which is in a state of total collapse, they need to wake up. They need to join these cardinals who have been courageous enough to affirm the traditional teaching. They need to insist that this synod stand up for the traditional teaching of the church on marriage and procreation and regarding homosexual unions, which were roundly condemned during the pontificates of Pope Benedict XVI and John Paul II as something the church can never support in any form whatsoever. They need to stand up and insist that this synod maintain orthodoxy, no matter what Pope Francis might indicate to the contrary in his off-the-cuff remarks. If they don't do that, they're evincing a complete lack of loyalty in the church in the true sense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would even take it further, although it's a pipe dream, but I would think at this point, this has become such a political powder keg. I wish someone would raise the possibility of canceling it altogether. I just think this is an opportunity for the baddies, for the forces of hell to sort of get in even deeper into the lifeblood of the church. I know that's not going to happen, but I think that I wish it would. And short of that, let's like I said, let's do another couple of programs on this to try to raise awareness. That's all we can do, and I think we have to do it now, right away, while there's still a few weeks left to get folks to jump on board.
I think that's going to be an important topic in the weeks to come. We only have, as you say, less than 2 months to go. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, keep your notes on the document handy. Then we'll get into it next week a little more in depth and really share with people, what's at stake here. So let's do it next week.
Okay. Take care, Mike.
All right. See you later. Bye-bye. That'll do it for us, folks. For the Remnant Forum, I'm Michael Matt, and we will see you next week.